Just hours from the chamber, Velma Barfield sat perfectly still on her prison cot, awake, waiting, and watching the clock. Outside, the November sun was rising. Inside, the end was closing in. It was November 1st, 1984, her final day on Earth. The paperwork was signed. The phone hadn't rung. No last-minute appeals were coming. She whispered prayers under her breath, the kind only God could hear. Her hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. There was no screaming, no begging for mercy, only a strange kind of calm. Not peace, something else. A surrender that didn't feel entirely voluntary. Velma's lawyers had tried for clemency. They argued she had changed, found God, found purpose. But the court said no. This time, there would be no miracle. Dr. Dorothy Lewis, one of the country's leading forensic psychiatrists, had warned that this moment shouldn't come at all. She had studied Velma closely and didn't see a monster. She saw a woman fractured beyond repair. Velma swore she wasn't the same woman, the one who stirred poison into pudding cups, who turned sugar into a weapon. That version of her was gone. In her place, she said, stood a redeemed soul, a grandmother, a prison volunteer who led Bible study every week for 6 years. But no matter how much time had passed or how many prayers she'd whispered, the state hadn't forgotten. Neither had the families of her victims. But who exactly was Velma Barfield? And what could she possibly have done that made her the first woman executed in the United States in over 2 decades? It all comes down to what set it off and what made it spiral. Velma was born on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina. But her roots ran deep into the red clay of rural South Carolina, where she was raised on a small tobacco and cotton farm outside Fayetteville. One of 9 children in a strict Pentecostal home, she grew up under a roof where fire and brimstone faith collided with violence behind closed doors. Her father was an angry, aggressive man. He hit, he yelled, and no one ever knew what would set him off. The children learned quickly that silence was the safest choice. Her mother just watched. Never intervened. Velma's early life was filled with fear. Her prayers are often the only escape. But the fear lingered, and so did the damage. She grew up scarred but devout, clutching her Bible in one hand and her secrets in the other. At 17, Velma did what many girls in her situation dream of. She got out. She dropped out of school and married Thomas Burke in 1949. For a while, it looked like her life was finally beginning. Burke wasn't abusive. They had 2 children. They laughed. They lived. But peace was short-lived. A hysterectomy left her in chronic pain. Her mood changed. Then her husband was in a car accident, worsening everything. As Burke spiraled into heavy drinking and painkillers, Velma followed, downing Librium and Valium, feeding a growing addiction that neither of them could control. Their happy home began to unravel, argument by argument, pill by pill. Then came the fire. April 4, 1969. Burke had passed out after a long night. Velma and the children left the house. Hours later, flames consumed their home, and Thomas Burke's life was taken. Investigators ruled it accidental. But tragedy for Velma was never far away. Months later, she married again, this time to Jennings Barfield, a soft-spoken widower. They tied the knot in August 1970, but by March of the following year, he was gone. Heart failure, the doctor said, just days after an argument, no autopsy, no suspicions. But the clock had already started ticking. And now it was getting louder. Velma went back home with her kids. Then her father passed. Lung cancer. But what happened next, no one could explain. In late 1974, Velma's mother, Lillian Bullard, suddenly fell sick. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Then, just as quickly, she got better. But by Christmas, the symptoms returned. This time, she wouldn't recover. Hours after being rushed to the hospital, Lillian was gone. December 30th, 1974. No one knew what caused it. No one asked, no autopsy, no answers. And still no one looked at Velma. Not yet. But the losses were starting to form a pattern. And soon someone would notice. It was 1975, and Velma Barfield had been arrested. But the darkest part hadn't come to light. Not yet. That year, she was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks. Petty fraud, not poison. She served 6 months behind bars and walked free unnoticed. But she didn't vanish. Instead, she disappeared into the quiet back roads of North Carolina, where old age and illness were just part of the job. Barfield found work as a home health nurse in Lumberton, caring for an elderly couple. 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife Dolly. A godsend, they thought. Trustworthy, religious, dependable. Until Montgomery fell sick. It was sudden. Violent stomach pains, vomiting. He passed away in January 1977. The cause is unclear but not suspicious. Then came Dolly. Just a few weeks later, she too fell mysteriously ill. The same symptoms. By March 1st, she was lifeless. Still, no questions asked. Velma moved on. Another job, another patient. This time, she was caring for a woman named Recorded Lee who'd broken her leg. But it wasn't Recorded who would suffer next. It was her husband, John Henry. In June 1977, John Henry Lee began vomiting uncontrollably. Chest pain, diarrhea. Doctors called it a severe stomach virus. Within days, he was gone. The signs were there, the pattern undeniable, but no one connected the dots. Not yet. Later that year, Velma moved in with her boyfriend, Stuart Taylor, a relative of one of her previous victims. And that's when it all unraveled. One night, during a church revival, Stuart clutched his stomach in agony. Hours later, he was in the hospital. Days after that, he was gone. But this time, an autopsy was ordered. And what they found in his system told a different story. Arsenic poisoning. Stuart had been poisoned. Investigators didn't need long. Before they could even process the results, they got a phone call from Velma's sister. She was crying, shaken, and what she said cracked the case wide open. Velma had confessed. She had poisoned Stuart. She had done it before. Velma Barfield was arrested for the murder of Stuart Taylor. Authorities exhumed the body of Jennings Barfield, her second husband. And there it was again. Arsenic. The noose tightened. Eventually, Velma admitted to the truth. Not all of it, but enough. She confessed to taking the life of her mother, Lillian Bullard. She confessed to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards. She admitted she'd poisoned John Henry Lee. And yes, she confessed to the case of Stuart Taylor. She said she did it for money because she'd been stealing from them to feed her addiction, that she'd used arsenic to cover her tracks. Her victims trusted her. They welcomed her into their homes, and she answered that trust with silence and a final breath. Now, Velma Barfield's fate hangs in the balance. The state called it something simple, calculated loss of life. Now it was up to them. Would she walk free, or would this be the end of her road? Midnight in Raleigh, North Carolina. The air inside Central Prison was quiet, but thick, like it knew what was coming. Velma Barfield sat in her cell, hands folded, eyes closed, whispering a prayer to a God she had come to know deeply. Her time was running out. Back in the courtroom, her attorneys had made their case. They spoke of a childhood filled with pain and instability, of trauma, of the wreckage left behind by addiction and mental illness, that Velma didn't think clearly, that she wasn't the monster they made her out to be. But the court didn't buy it. None of it changed what she'd done. In December 1978, she was convicted of first-degree homicide in the arsenic poisoning of Stuart Taylor and sentenced to capital punishment. There was no row for women in North Carolina at the time. No space set aside for someone like her. So Velma was housed in the escape-prone high-risk wing of Central Prison, surrounded by the mentally ill and the dangerous. For a while, She was the only woman under a death sentence in the state. Later, they created a new unit just for women at the North Carolina Correctional Institution. But Velma was already there, already waiting. And during that wait, something inside her changed. She found God again. Or maybe she found him for the first time. On Roe, Velma Barfield became a born-again Christian. Not a performance, not a stunt. Day after day, she read scripture, prayed, and began ministering to other inmates. She wrote heartfelt letters to Governor Jim Hunt, begging him to consider her transformation, to weigh her redemption against her crimes. To see the woman she was now, not the one who poisoned, lied, and watched people become lifeless. Support flooded in from churches and Christian leaders across the country. Ruth and Billy Graham among them. They all wanted mercy, but mercy never came. Governor Hunt denied clemency. Velma kept fighting. Her legal team pushed through the courts, arguing that her sentence would be unjust. But every appeal was denied. To the jury, it didn't matter. The disorders, the trauma, the pleas for mercy, they all sounded like excuses. And that appeal was denied just like the rest. Because at the end of the day, one fact remained crystal clear. Velma Barfield knew what she was doing. And the jury believed that no diagnosis, no mental disorder could erase that truth. Eventually, Velma stopped fighting. She told her attorneys not to pursue the U.S. Supreme Court. She said she wanted to die with dignity, that she was at peace. But deep down, the truth was harder. She still hoped for a miracle, a last-second reprieve. Something. Anything that might wipe clean the years of addiction, of theft, of damage, something that would explain what had driven her to do the unthinkable. But as midnight crept closer, that miracle never came. And so Velma Barfield, the Sunday school teacher, the only woman on North Carolina's death row, began her final hours, not in rage, not in panic, but in prayer. She had accepted what came next. Late into the night, the steel door opened with a heavy clang. Guards stepped in, faces unreadable, voices low. It was time. Velma Barfield rose slowly from her cot, calm, composed, but trembling beneath the surface. She knew the routine now. She'd rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, but nothing could prepare her for the real thing. They led her down the corridor to the dressing room. No shackles, no cuffs, just quiet footsteps on concrete floors. In a small room with peeling paint and harsh fluorescent lights, they laid out her options. Velma chose pink pajamas, soft, simple, almost childlike. She slipped them on in silence. Then they brought her back to her cell. Alone again. Except she wasn't. Not in her mind, not in her spirit. Her faith sat beside her like a second skin. It was the one thing that hadn't abandoned her. A guard returned, clipboard in hand. One final question. What do you want for your last meal? Velma looked up, the corners of her mouth twitching with something close to amusement. Or maybe just disbelief. After a beat, she answered, cheese doodles and Coca-Cola. Not a steak dinner, not fried chicken, just junk food, childhood food, something easy, something familiar. And maybe that was the point, something that reminded her of a time before it all went wrong. Velma was granted her final visits. Family, friends, people who still believed in her even now. They gathered by her side, hands held, prayers whispered through tears. One of them remembered her saying, "When I go into that gas chamber at 2 a.m., it's my gateway to heaven." She believed it truly. They cried. She didn't. And then all at once, it was time. Velma Barfield was let out of her cell for the last time. Step by step, she walked toward the chamber. Her breath shortened. Her heart raced, and yet a strange calm washed over her. She didn't understand it. She wasn't sure she trusted it. But it was there. It was 2 a.m. November 2nd, 1984. The chamber was silent, the air stiff with finality. Velma Barfield lay strapped to the gurney, her pink pajamas soft against the cold, sterile leather. The moment had arrived. There was no more courtroom and no more clemency. This was it. She turned her head slightly, facing the witnesses behind the glass. Her voice came low but steady, measured, almost tender. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain. All the families are connected, and I am sorry. And I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. That was all. No tears, no defiance, no last-minute cries for mercy, just sorrow and gratitude laid bare. Seconds later, the lethal injection began. Velma didn't flinch. She didn't fight it. A strange stillness came over her, as if she'd already crossed over. The cocktail of chemicals flowed through her veins, one to sedate, one to paralyze, and the last to stop her heart. She met it all with silence. Witnesses said it best. She passed away peacefully without any visible distress or pain. By 2:15 a.m., Velma Barfield was officially pronounced dead. 15 minutes. That's all it took to end 6 years of death row, decades of torment, and the life of a woman who once claimed her murders weren't her own. But Billy's, her alternate personality, her body was taken away and buried in a quiet cemetery in rural North Carolina, just miles from where her life began. And next to the man she first loved, her husband, Thomas Burke, Velma had one final wish: to donate her organs. Her heart couldn't be restarted, but her corneas and skin tissue were salvaged. One last act of giving from a woman whose past had taken so much. She died at 52 years of age. Velma Barfield wasn't just another execution. She was the first woman put to death in the United States after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976. Velma Barfield's story is a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always arrive with rage, noise, or blood on its hands. Sometimes it comes quietly, wearing a kind smile, carrying a Bible, and offering to help. Trust is powerful, but when given to the wrong person, it can be deadly. If you found this case as unsettling as I did, make sure you subscribe to Crime Vaults. We tell the stories the headlines forget, raw, detailed, and without sugarcoating. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the next case.